Grace to you all this morning and peace from God our Father, from our Lord and Savior Jesus the Christ. Amen. Can you hear me all the way in the back? Yes. Good. We'll make this short. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the service, today is Christ the King. Christ the King is the last Sunday in the church year. It's a relatively new celebration on the Christian calendar within the past 100 years. And you would expect that the readings that we have, which are specifically chosen for this day, would reflect the nature of what it means for Christ to be King. So what another name you might give this day is the day of the church's identity crisis. What the heck is going on here? Here it is, Christ the King. When you think of images of kings, of royalty, of people in power, of people in authority, probably what you think of is a lot of wealth, a lot of prestige, a lot of power, a lot of adoration and respect from people. You think of somebody who's very, very well regarded, and instead, in an ironic way, what we have is the crucifixion of Jesus as our gospel text for the day of Christ the King. So I believe the reason that was chosen, besides the attempt at irony, is because if you read carefully or listened carefully, you notice that four times in that text, 4 different people call Jesus King or Messiah. 2 actually call him King. That would be the Roman soldiers who stand nearby, and Pilate, who posts the title of his charges on the cross over his head, which says, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The Romans would have understood Jesus' identity in political terms, and therefore called him King. 2 groups or people also referred to him as Messiah, which would have been the uniquely Jewish title for the king, for the leader that God had chosen to guide God's people. First, the people who were gathered around to watch the spectacle of the crucifixion. And then one of the thieves who was hanged with Jesus refers to him as Messiah, which means God's chosen one. And even in those titles, there's a lot of irony. They both mean king. Jesus, at this moment, perhaps of any other, looks the least like a king that you would ever expect. But I think that's the point. It's not an identity crisis. It's an inspiration to us to reorient our thinking to what it means to have power. Because you'll notice that closely tied in 3 of those cases, except for the title of Jesus, in 3 of those cases, closely tied with the title Messiah or King, is the admonition to Jesus, the reminder to him, almost a scolding of him, save yourself. The people mean it, and the soldiers mean it in mockery towards him. Save yourself if you are the Messiah, the King. And the one thief says it to him in desperation. Save yourself and us. So we have 2 kinds of things going on that are very closely related. Number 1, what does it mean to be a person of power? And number 2, what does it mean to be saved? Because you will also probably notice, or if you know the story already, that Jesus responds to none of these. He does not suddenly exercise kingly or messianic power. He saves, apparently, except for the last couple of verses, nobody at that moment. Because we understand that the request to save yourself meant very concretely, very specifically, and very much at that moment, come down from the cross. Get rid of your enemies. Show your power. Flex your muscle. If you really are the Son of God, make God evident here among us. And intentionally, and I also want to suggest to you compassionately, Jesus rejects all of those opportunities. Why? I think we get a clue in Jesus' relationship with that other person hanged with them. Who scolds the first thief for his being so self-centered, and not at this last moment acknowledging his own guilt and responsibility for being there on the cross. And then he simply says to Jesus, in what is perhaps the 5th reference to Jesus as a king, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Whatever that might look like. It didn't look very good at that moment, but the thief knew that in this man Jesus, there was something worth adoring, something worth respecting, something worth holding on to. And so he says to Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. To which Jesus responds to the only person in all of Jesus' interactions in his earthly ministry, today you will be with me in paradise. The other thief on the cross who wanted it so badly, but wasn't in a position to recognize it, the people who only saw it as a mockery, the soldiers who only understood it in political terms, did not get that same blessing because they did not come at it with the right point of view, with the right openness of heart. All they saw was the final defeat of either their enemy, their troublemaker, or this Jewish upstart. But they did not see that on that cross, in the person of Jesus, God was exercising God's kingly power in a different and authoritative and eternal way. Because what we believe happened on that cross is that in fact Jesus did save himself and us, just as that thief requested. But not for a time. Not until that thief could get in trouble again and perhaps end up on another cross in another time. Not just for the next few years until that earthly kingdom would crumble and somebody new would come along. We're mindful perhaps of the reading from Jeremiah in which the shepherds are not shepherds. Because they're doing the exact opposite of what shepherds do. Shepherds take care of the sheep. But in the case of God's shepherds, they're not taking care of the people. But they're only in it for their own good. They're shepherds in name only, not in the exercise of their authority. And Jesus is the reverse. He is a shepherd in the exercise of his authority, and therefore we give him that name. He is a king in the exercise of his authority and compassion, and therefore we give him that name today. What makes Jesus king, Messiah, ruler, authority, power? It's the deep compassion that he has for his people in order to free us from the eternal consequences of our own rebellion, of our own rejection, of our own self-centeredness. To free us from those eternal consequences, not just in the future, but now, so that we might live a life of freedom, of hope, of generosity, of kindness, of love, of compassion, of graciousness. I suppose that we could say that the way we regard our rulers is the way we live our lives. And so if your king is a king who's all about himself, then that's kind of the model that's set for us. But if your king, your leader, your ruler is a ruler or leader who cares about others, who seeks for the welfare of the people, then that's what we'll do too. And that's why today is Christ the King. Because we're reminded as God's people that God does what God does in compassion and love, in self-giving. And so we show in our style of life, in our moving forward, what it means to have Jesus as our King. We live lives of compassion, of self-giving, of concern for the welfare of God's people. We pray that others will do the same for us. The miracle of this day, the miracle of the church, is that God continues to work life in the midst of death, light in the midst of darkness, through us for the good of others. I can say with confidence that we as God's people here at Emmanuel, whether you're a member or a visitor or a friend, that we as God's people at Emmanuel know who our King is, and that we struggle to act accordingly. I pray for you is that God might bless you in that effort. God knows the world needs it. That you might stay centered in the kingship of Jesus. Know that you're part of that blessed kingdom, and that paradise is not only your destiny, but your current reality, because God is with you.